The Bridge Between Worlds. My name is Katarina Novak. I'm 43 years old, a documentary filmmaker from Slovenia, and I never thought a university lecture would change how I see the entire modern world. It started 3 months ago in Oxford. I was filming a series about global education when I stumbled into Professor Richard Williams' linguistics seminar. The room was packed with students from 27 different countries. Chinese, Brazilian, Nigerian, Swedish, all sitting together, waiting. Professor Williams walked to the podium, looked across the crowded hall, and said something that made everyone freeze. English is no longer just a language. It's the most powerful resource in human history. I watched the room carefully through my camera lens. Some students smirked. Others whispered to each other. A young man from Spain leaned over to his friend and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's incredibly arrogant." The professor didn't react. He just waited. Then a French student raised her hand. Her voice was sharp, challenging. "But professor, English borrowed heavily from Latin, from French, from Germanic languages. Isn't it just a patchwork? A collection of stolen pieces?" A German student jumped in. "China has over 1 billion native speakers of Mandarin. Spanish spreads faster across Latin America. Why would English be superior?" The atmosphere shifted. Students were nodding, agreeing with the criticism. I could feel the tension rising. The professor seemed cornered. Instead, he smiled. "Exactly," he said quietly. "That patchwork is the secret." He pressed a button, and a slide appeared on the screen behind him. I zoomed in with my camera. 60% of English words have Latin or French roots. The grammar remains simpler than most European languages. Shakespeare alone invented 1,700 new words that are still used today. English is not pure, Professor Williams continued, his voice gaining strength. And that is precisely why it dominates. Purity creates rigidity. Borrowing creates flexibility. English didn't stay locked in one cultural box. It absorbed, adapted, transformed with every civilization it touched. A Korean student in the front row whispered to herself, "So it's like open source language?" The professor heard her. "Yes, exactly like that." I felt something shift in my own understanding. I've spent my career documenting cultural differences, language barriers, but I'd never considered that some languages might be structurally better equipped for global communication. Professor Williams moved to his next slide. Numbers filled the screen, and the students leaned forward. After World War II, English became the default language of science, aviation, diplomacy, and international business. Today, 80% of all academic papers worldwide are published in English. 95% of international business contracts are written in English. On the internet, more than half of all content exists in English, despite English speakers making up only about 20% of internet users. A Chinese student raised his hand slowly. "So, knowledge itself flows primarily through English?" "Not just knowledge," the professor replied. "Opportunity, innovation, connection. If you want to participate in the global conversation, whether it's climate science, artificial intelligence, medical research, or international trade, you need English. Not because of colonialism anymore, but because everyone else has already made that choice." A Brazilian student spoke up, her voice uncertain. "But that seems unfair. Doesn't it give native English speakers an enormous advantage?" "It absolutely does," Professor Williams said bluntly. "And that's a real problem. But the question isn't whether it's fair. The question is why English specifically succeeded where other languages didn't. Latin was once the language of scholars. French was the language of diplomacy. Each dominated for a time, then declined. Why is English different?" He changed the slide to show a timeline. 1600s English expands through trade routes and early colonization. 1800s the British Empire spreads English to every continent. 1900s American economic and cultural dominance pushes English into cinema, music, science, and technology. 2000s the internet age makes English the digital lingua franca. English didn't just spread through conquest, the professor explained. It spread through usefulness. The British Empire planted the seeds, yes, but American pop culture, Hollywood films, Silicon Valley technology, these things made English feel necessary, not forced. An Indian student spoke up, and her perspective cut through the academic discussion like a knife. "I grew up in Mumbai," she said. "English is my third language. My grandmother speaks Marathi, my mother speaks Hindi and Marathi, and I speak all three plus English. For my grandmother, English was the colonizer's language. For my mother, it was a tool for better jobs. For me, It's just normal. It's the language of my favorite YouTube channels, my university textbooks, my job applications. It's mine now too. The room went completely silent. Even I stopped adjusting my camera settings. This was the moment I'd been hoping to capture, the human truth beneath the statistics. Professor Williams nodded slowly. That's the key. English is no longer owned by Britain or America. It belongs to the world now. There are more non-native English speakers than native speakers. Indian English, Nigerian English, Singaporean English, these are all valid, evolving forms. The language continues to change because millions of people keep reshaping it. A Nigerian student added in Lagos, "We mix English with Yoruba and Pidgin. My parents think it's not proper English, but it works. Everyone understands." And that, the professor said, pointing at him, is why English will outlast the empires that spread it, because it doesn't demand purity. It allows variation, creativity, mutation. Other languages have academies that try to protect them from change. English has no such protection, and that's its greatest strength. I thought about my own experience. I learned English at age 12 in Slovenia. Compared to learning German with its complex case system, English felt almost forgiving. You could make mistakes and still be understood. Professor Williams returned to his data one final time. Consider this: air traffic controllers worldwide must speak English. By international law, every pilot, regardless of nationality, communicates in English. Why? Because in 1951, after multiple crashes caused by miscommunication, the International Civil Aviation Organization made it mandatory. They chose English because it was already becoming the common ground. He paused, letting that sink in. In medicine, drug names, treatment protocols, research findings, English. In programming, almost every coding language uses English syntax. In academic conferences, even when held in non-English speaking countries, presentations are usually in English. The United Nations has 6 official languages, but most of the actual work happens in English. A Mexican student shook her head. This feels like linguistic imperialism. It is and it isn't. Professor Williams replied, yes, English spread through historical violence. Yes, native speakers have unfair advantages. Yes, we're losing linguistic diversity. These are serious ethical problems. He paused, but here's what's also true: when a Syrian refugee arrives in Germany, and a Turkish social worker helps her apply for asylum, they probably speak to each other in English. When scientists in Japan and Brazil collaborate on climate research, they publish in English. When young people in Thailand, South Africa, and Sweden play video games together online, they communicate in English. It's become the tool that connects us. I could see students struggling with this complexity. It wasn't a simple story of good or bad. It was messy, like history always is. Professor Williams walked to the front of the stage, closer to his students. The true superiority of English, if we can even call it that, is not in its grammar or its vocabulary. It's in its radical openness to change. Every culture that touches English adds something to it: new words, new pronunciations, new ways of expressing ideas. The language is constantly being remade by billions of people who've claimed it as their own. He looked around the room one more time. English didn't conquer the world through superiority. The world chose English imperfect, messy, borrowed English because it adapts, absorbs, and grows with humanity itself. It's not a cage that traps us in one way of thinking. It's a bridge that connects us across 1,000 cultures. The lecture ended. Students stood and applauded, but it wasn't polite applause. It was genuine, sustained, filled with the energy of changed perspectives. I stopped recording and sat there in the empty hall for a long time afterward. I've worked in 17 countries. I've filmed in languages I don't speak, relying on translators, but English has always been the constant, the language I could fall back on, the bridge I could cross to reach people who spoke no Slovenian. It's not perfect, it's not fair, but it's real. As Professor Williams once wrote, a language is not a cage, it is a bridge. And perhaps that's all we can ask of any language, that it helps us reach each other across the distances that divide us. Thank you for watching until the end. Please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and give us a like.